Hello and welcome to our Leaders Talk segment. In today's episode, we look forward to gaining insights on how corporate social responsibility in the Indian banking sector can be made more effective and inclusive. Because CSR in the Indian banking sector has primarily focused on financial inclusion, providing financial services to untapped to economic development of the country. And in the last couple of years, the banking sector has increasingly shown interest in integrating sustainability into their business models. And one such progressive bank has been the HDFC Bank, which has incorporated a clearly defined CSR philosophy in its working. So to know more about this and how this particular sector can help improve the scope of CSR in the country, we are extremely delighted and pleased to have with us our thought leader and CSR expert, Ms Nusrat Pathan, who's the head of CSR at HDFC Bank. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ruchika. Thank you for having me, and I really look forward to an engaging discussion.
So, as I was talking about the evolution of CSR in the Indian banking sector, because the CSR has been made mandatory for corporates, but under RBI regulation, there is no such obligation for the banking sector per se to get involved in CSR activities. But in the last few years, there has been an increasing interest shown by banks to get into this actively. So can you comment on how this evolution is happening and why do you think this is happening?
Sure, Ruchika. So just to set the record, while RBI does not mandate a 2%, but HDFC Bank being a private bank, we are governed by the rules, by the CSR rules and the MCA. So 2% is definitely a mandate for us. If you look at it historically, I think other than the first couple of the 2 years, the initial 2 years where we spent a lot of our time putting systems into processes and processes into place, the bank has been meeting its 2% obligation and even exceeding it in a couple of years. So that really has been a trend historically. But not talking about just numbers, I think it's important that the bank took the time and the effort to step back for a couple of years and put its systems into place. And I think that is really something that is, kept us in good stead. Because we've built on that. We've built on this foundation on a very clear process-based foundation that we created for ourselves in CSR, and that's really helped us, meet our obligations, and more importantly, also create the right impact. Because it's just not about meeting your obligations, right? It's about the the eventual impact that you're actually creating in the communities in which you operate. So I think that is something that was really good for us. If you asked about the journey, and this is pretty much the journey, and alongside CSR, I think when the rules came into place, they typically put CSR or the philanthropy really into the forefront.
Right.
For a couple of years, one would say that the actual corporate citizenship or your sustainability was something that was the took a little bit of a backseat in terms of the limelight or the stage. So I think the challenge was to bring these together and actually get them to talk the same language, right? Because that really is a challenge. Because given the current ecosystem, your reporting, your structures, everything are lean towards the CSR in terms of the funding. And the challenge was really to see how we could, as a bank, embrace community as one of the aspects of a larger picture. So the journey definitely for us has been to paint a larger canvas.
So since you told me that HDFC Bank comes under the mandatory guidelines legislation, India, in fact, is the only country which has made CSR mandatory. So what are the major giveaways or learnings or key lessons that the CSR culture in India can teach the rest of the world?
Okay, so I think that's a pretty deep question, but I'm not going to look at it as a lesson for the others. But I think it's very important here to recognize that it was a very bold step that the country took. and extremely required as well, right? Each country has its own challenges, it has its own people and the population that it needs to cater to. So I think in the Indian context, bringing CSR mandate was extremely essential to ensure that the community that we operate, society is more equitable. I think that has definitely played a very, very strong role, and more so in the COVID times, where we've actually seen a lot of funds flowing in to the actual people who require it at the grassroots. So I think that has really been good. As a learning to other nations, I wouldn't say, but as a learning for ourselves, probably more coordination between the efforts and the funds that are actually flowing, because there are a lot of funds available. There are a lot of good causes available, right? To ensure that all this comes together seamlessly without duplication, so that we can ensure that every penny that actually goes out under CSR is well utilized. But eventually, it's the money of our investors, it's the money of our stakeholders, right? So I think that amount of responsibility from the side of corporates, a little bit of guidance from the states and the partners, I think that is something which is there, and we've seen a lot of forums evolve, but that is something that needs to come in together much, much more stronger.
All right. Also, as we talk about the evolution of CSR per se in general, there have been massive changes because, the pandemic posed so many challenges, and corporates and NGOs and agencies, they had to restructure their implementation strategies. They had to restructure their entire projects. And talking about the global dialogue on climate change also, that has also impacted the way corporates and organizations are looking at CSR. And they're also looking at, lower carbon emissions. So how do you think that has really changed the entire thinking of organizations like yours? And what is the way forward for CSR? What kind of new activities are we going to see in the future?
So one very important evolution, I would say very, very organic, although and not really necessarily due to the pandemic, has been the alignment that, one has seen between CSR projects within the organization, various sustainability efforts. I think aligning all of these to the SDGs is something that we've seen. I think almost a lot rather of the annual reports talk about SDGs, talk about alignment, and I think that's the path that a lot of people are taking. This in itself helps you to ensure that the funds that are going are focused towards relevant issues. One is also looking at addressing various things, and even when you're talking about climate change, you're talking about water, all these are elements that are covered. So I think concentrating on that, building on it, and as a bank, and I'm not necessarily saying about CSR projects, but as a bank, what is your impact on the SDGs? Yes. If we can look at that, create robust projects around that, and also be able to measure the impact of these, I think that the measurement or the impact piece is something that is going to take the forefront for all projects. The questions that one is going to, and one already does, but is going to be asked is that, it's, even if it is a good to do, what is the impact? What is it that you're overall, where is it that you're heading with this project? I think those questions are what, the answers to those questions will be something that will be demanded, not just internally by the organizations, but by various stakeholders. And I think that is something that corporates should be and will be held answerable for.
All right. And as we know that HDFC Bank itself is among the founding members of Climate Finance Leadership Initiative. So can you throw some more light on how you are integrating the whole subject of climate change and nature conservancy in your CSR activities?
Okay. So of course, you would have seen that the bank's areas of focus, we have specific areas of focus, right? We work on education, we work on skilling, we work on rural development and financial literacy. And of course, more recently, we've, largely prompted due to the pandemic, we've also moved on health. and sanitation. So that's something that we've been doing. Within each of these, we've always had resource management or natural resources as one of the binding themes, because one can't go into a rural geography and talk about skilling without actually looking at the availability of water, for instance, or the soil quality, etc. These are all very essential elements of a program. So these have always been a part of the planning. I think what's happened now, more essentially and specifically since last year, the bank also announced its plans to be carbon neutral by 25. So that by 32. So that's another 10-year milestone that we have for ourselves. It's just that when we are doing the planning, we are more cognizant of our goals, and we have very, very clear goals that we've now defined around these. So I would have specific goals in terms of the environment. I have a target of planting 25 lakh trees in the next 2 years. I have a goal of 2,500 smart schools. I have a goal of bringing X amount of land under cultivation, whether it's water storage capacities to be created in rural areas. So each of these have a goal. The planning is more focused towards these. So that's on the CSR project piece. And this is something that also then helps and prompts us to build a stronger strategy on moving towards carbon neutrality. So that's where my CSR projects and probably the ESG piece really comes together. With regards to talking about environmental responsibility, in addition to external projects, there's also an internal system that we're working on, right? So you're talking about being more responsible for, using the natural resources. A majority, in fact, all our corporate offices have gone one-time, single-time, plastic-free. We are increasingly looking at our own emissions, our portfolio emissions. So that's a journey that the bank has already started and is committed to.
Wow, that's really inspiring. And we also, along with this, we have seen that companies and organizations across, they are looking at technology-enabled projects now.
Absolutely.
The new big thing. So do you think it is going to stay there, or the relevance will go down eventually?
So I don't see the relevance going down, quite honestly, Ruchika. I think all of us have been pushed to taking the step towards technology and incorporating and embracing technology rather. I think it was always there, but there was a lot of hesitancy to actually see whether this will work on field or not. And we've all seen that that's worked. But I don't see technology as replacing the traditional interventions.
Right.
I only see a hybrid version that is evolving, which will be definitely more effective. What does work is, from a monitoring point of view, I think a lot of us have strengthened our own systems. Everybody's gone, whether you're talking about implementation partners, they found their own comfort in using technology to actually implement programs on field, whether it is education, whether it is skilling. Donors and partners, on the other hand, have built stronger systems for monitoring using technology, using doing e-visits, doing geotagging. So all these we've experimented with all this, and I think whatever is the good is there to stay. And if we are talking about increasing our scope of work, reaching out, creating that accountability for ourselves to ensure that the monies are utilized wisely, technology is a very, very integral part of that. So that's definitely there to stay. And in fact, we've been working with a lot of partners and even supporting their own technology. So, we have we've partnered with Deshpande Foundation, where we're working with them to actually see how they can use technology to identify and to monitor farm ponds, which they're doing, and to create, enhance the effectiveness of the place that they actually identify for, ponds, so that, there's a better output. So these technologies are being used by projects, and we've always welcomed this, and we are quite certain that this is there to stay.
All right. And as you were talking about the measurability and the impact of the projects, the ongoing projects, as part of CSR law requirements, CSR monitoring and impact measurement have increasingly become important for corporates to meet the CSR goals. What are your thoughts on the key impact measurement areas that corporates and organizations need to focus on?
So I think, and whether this was made mandatory or not, I think impact is something that all corporates look at, right? Because you wouldn't do a CSR project without actually knowing what the outcome is and actually being able to monitor it.
Right.
Getting a third party in to do an impact just at the level of transparency, and it's great. So I think that's welcome. I would, however, have loved, if the rules could accommodate the requirements of larger corporates such as us to increase the amount of spend on corporates on the impact piece, because I think the current threshold is something which is absolutely insignificant if one is looking at large CSR portfolios like us. So, there, a request really, which we've already put, is to enhance that. Because that's definitely going to be a requirement for us. But if I'm talking about what is it that one needs to focus on, I think at the time, and this comes in right at the stage of planning. When you're planning a project, if there is transparency, if there is agreement with your partner on the goals that you are hoping to achieve, both long-term and short-term, not just your output, but your outcome level goals. And if that is actually integrated with your own organization's theory of change, then I think the commitment on both to reach that is much more higher. And linking this to the overall theory of change of the organization becomes extremely important, because you're working at three levels, right? You have an NGO executing, there are certain objectives on field, you have your own goals, which would be the project goals, and you have the theory of change or the overall commitment that you have as an organization. So it's extremely important that all these three integrate together, and that needs to be done at the time of planning. It can't be done on hindsight. So I think planning is something that is extremely essential, and getting the impact parameters right at the time of planning is what would really help, both from a monitoring perspective as well as from an impact perspective. So this, I think, definitely is very clear, and this is something that I'm sure most of us are incorporating that, but one needs to actually strengthen this.
So basically, all the stakeholders have to work in tandem and in collaboration, in sync. So now, because the pandemic has changed the CSR activities to a great extent, even NGOs and implementation agencies have changed their strategies. What are your expectations from them now, and what would you suggest other areas of improvement for them?
Okay, so from the partner level, I think one has to respect that they've done a commendable job this year, right? One can't take that away. Given the challenges on field, I think after the initial, first one and a half months, they were on field and active on field, irrespective of whether HDFC Bank was backing them on the, on supporting the communities. They were outright committed and on field doing that. So I can't really talk more about the impact and the presence that they've had on field. That's been fantastic. They've also transitioned very quickly to adopt and embrace technology wherever possible on field. But I think if I was to look at it and, probably talk about the two things that I think from an NGO perspective or an organization, my partner perspective, what are the two things that I think there needs to be an improvement on? I would still say reporting, and more so financial reporting. And I really think that that's an area that needs to be developed. One needs to develop the acronym for that, because partners are busy implementing. Very often the reporting is something that is done as a by the way, and I think that creates a lot of disconnect sometimes between the partners and the corporates, because you're pushing them for the report. You have your priorities, they have their priorities. and each their own, and rightfully so. However, helping partners build their own skills at financial reporting, and in reporting in particular on the programmatic piece, I think that is something that definitely is an ask that we have from our partners, and that is something that we ourselves are working with them to actually build and train that, and to create that capacity within the partners that we work with. So I think that that's really something that increasingly most corporates do and should be doing, is to build that capacity within the NGO partners and help them and understand what the requirement is. Yeah. Okay, I hope that answers your question.
And at the policy level, what do you really expect, should be the changes that should be incorporated, and to make work more, the CSR culture more cohesive and more inclusive and more sustainable, of course?
Sure. So we all know that there have been a recent spate of amendments and clarifications that have come in the CSR rules, and each of them have impacted us to some level. I think when one looks at those, one will look at these amendments or clarifications that have come in largely to prompt people to utilize their CSR in an appropriate and a more responsible manner, right? And one does respect that, but these have also led to a lot of corresponding changes that one has had to make in its own modus operandi, so to say, or in its own processes, right? One of the largest ones has been the change where we've spoken about spend against a dispersal. Now, this has the largest impact on field, because your reporting has suddenly changed from a dispersal perspective to a spend perspective.
Right.
Where you're actually saying that spend on field has to be taken, and that needs to, it brings with it its own challenges. This year hasn't been easy for anyone, with the pandemic. So I think these changes, right, will tighten the monitoring more, to say, for us as well, because you know exactly where the funds have been spent down to the last penny, because you're reporting that as well, right? So systems will only strengthen. If I was to say what else can be done to improve, I think from a reporting perspective, the CSR rules are clear enough, also broad enough to give a flexibility for organizations to develop programs, in a particular area. So I don't think that they're very stringent or straitjacketed at all. From CSR rules and the Schedule for 7 perspective. What I do think is that the governments, or in fact, a lot of states have already started, right, where they talk about their requirements. They have their own CSR websites where they are listing projects, because that is something that would help corporates in their planning. You identify what are the needs of a particular geography, and you can actually then facilitate and work around the priorities of that particular state, and the partners that are working in. So identifying the right partner, identifying the right needs of the state, and then creating a program would become much, much more easier if you have many more networks such as these. And a lot of the states have already started requesting, listing projects, listing corporates in their work, because then that really helps partnerships and need-based partnerships to evolve.
So what are your thoughts on the CSR set of rule that is made way in the CSR laws? What do you think are the pros and cons of this particular policy?
So I think in the course of our discussion, I've pretty much covered that, because as I've already said, a lot of these just one can understand the intent is to ensure that on-field execution is in the spirit of the law. So welcome change. I also spoke about the impact piece, because I do feel that the funds allocated towards impact should be much more, or should at least be in proportion to the overall budget of the organization, right? So that's something that I definitely think is required. Other than that, it offers enough flexibility to identify and run with projects that you choose to. But at this moment, I don't think that there is anything in terms of another change that is required, because it will take some time for us to assimilate these requirements and actually institutionalize them.
Right, right. So, if I can ask, you of course must have to face challenges during the pandemic, and challenges in terms of logistics and following protocols. So, can you elaborate on what exactly the projects, what kind of projects were undertaken, and what were the challenges that you had to deal with at that point of time? And if there have been any key learnings from those.
Sure. So from a CSR perspective, when I'm talking about, of course, and I'm not talking about the bank, because the bank had to be up and running, day one of the pandemic, because, we weren't really, how do you say, we were there, we were the warriors, and the banking industry had to just be, they couldn't really work from home, right? So they were there from day one. And there was another set of processes, regulations that the bank had to actually ensure these people were up there. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking just purely from a CSR perspective. Definitely, initially the projects did suffer because all of us were taken back. It's something that's unprecedented. But I think and if I was to talk about what we did, my projects team really looked at it very realistically and said, okay, let's look at it. Whatever the funds we've allocated for the first quarter, and that at that point of time, nobody really thought that this would be something that would carry on for 2 years, right? But for the next 4 months, 5 months, let's look at that money and let's defer that to something else. And we were quick to get back to our partners and tell them that, okay, if you are going on field, look at the requirements. We had a lot of migrants coming back to our villages, right?
Yeah.
Because we're working in rural development, education, and skilling, and these were the projects that majorly impacted for us. Education programs came to a standstill temporarily because people couldn't go onto the field. They had their own teething problems before they could actually move online. We started a train the trainer, a program for teachers where we could actually help teachers understand, how to teach remotely. Simple things like, how do I even project myself through a Google Meet or a Zoom to take a Zoom class? Because one needs to know, you just have a phone, right? You don't have a system, or you may not even have an iPad or a tab or anything. So how do you do that? How do you demonstrate? How do you create breakout rooms? So these little technicalities, we actually had programs run for the teachers to train them on that. And our partners also to be able to deliver remotely. Similarly with the skilling training, also we quickly adopted to a hybrid version to do this. But as I was saying, a lot of programs on field stalled. We realized that the fund flow will be affected because large scale projects we will not be able to implement. We would be coming into the monsoon, delays, etc. And that money was quickly deferred to health. That's when I spoke to you, I said that last 2 years we've actually seen that we've done a lot on the COVID front. I think the strategy for us there was to work very closely with the state governments,
right?
And this was not really through the CSR team, but we have a lot of branch presence, pan India, and they were our face. While we were working remotely, we couldn't travel. They were the face. They approached the governments to understand what the requirements were. And we quickly turned around and, happy to say, since the pandemic, I think we've promised and we've allocated close to about 200 crores towards multiple programs under CSR. In fact, 200 crores. And of course, another, right initially when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of support that we gave directly to the government. By way of funds. So, but again, if you're talking about 250 to 300 crores that have actually gone out for COVID support. We've tied up with the industry's best. We tied up with L&T to provide oxygen plants, all DRDO certified oxygen plants, large scale plants with the government to set it up. Because we didn't want to do anything that was not sustainable. While there was a requirement, a very strong requirement, we refrained from doing anything which was consumables, which was masks, which was sanitizers, because we felt that, that's not something one's going to be able to track. So I think what really we our focus was create long-term sustainable support for the health sector, something that's tangible, something that's trackable, something that we could monitor, so that we don't turn around and say that, hey, we've spent this money and where are the footprints? So I think that was a strategy that we were very clear with. Of course, there was some amount of funds that we did allocate for immediate support, whether it's relief, etc. But that was largely through my NGO partners. So I think more than us, it was the partners who took up the challenge very quickly to course correction and modified the strategy. We very clearly said that, okay, 5 months, this period will be for COVID support before we move on to our other programs. And that's pretty much worked seamlessly for us.
All right. And I think, as we say, sometimes in the waves of change, we tend to find our directions. And I think HDFC has done a commendable job, and it has actually set an example for the community and the others who are into CSR activities. And I'm sure this will definitely lead CSR into the right direction. So CSR has found the right direction under your guidance. And on that note, I would like to wrap up the interview. Thank you so much. This was exceptionally insightful. Thanks a lot for your presence. Thanks for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ruchika.
And viewers, if you want to see more such interesting dialogues and conversations, please log into our channel and please do subscribe to us and keep watching our videos. Thank you so much.